So, next, Aaron is going to talk to you about sulfide mining.
All right, so if you watch the political press talk about PolyNet, which is one of the specific sulfide mine proposals, or about the issue more generally, you would get the impression that this is a highly divisive issue for DFLers, that there is basically an even split, or that there's a geographic divide. And I want to start by just telling you that's not true. And there's certainly a difference of opinion inside the party. There's no doubt about that. But recently there was a poll that was done by KSTP, not exactly the most liberal outlet in the world, and that showed that inside the state of Minnesota, on the question of whether or not people think we should approve the PolyNet sulfide mine proposal in northeastern Minnesota, that it's pretty much within the margin of error. 37% said yes, 35% said no, a lot of folks said they don't. But if you look at how many DFLers answered that question, 50% said that they proposed the project. Only 23% said that they approved of it. That's a 2-to-1 margin. And that fits with not just that poll, but a bunch of other polls that I've seen and done on this question. DFLers are concerned about water, and there are some folks who are really loud voices that believe that they can cow people who are concerned about Minnesota's water into silence. And part of the thing that makes me so angry about this issue, and I'm kind of angry today. I woke up this morning and I opened the paper. Well, I went online, I opened the paper. And on the front page of the Mesabi Daily News, I was called a liar. So, and not just me, but the other folks who were standing with me yesterday at a press conference, including Kristen. And so, this has become an argument about who can shout loudest and who can make the other side shut up. And frankly, that's just the most destructive thing I've seen inside the DFL the entire lifetime that I've been a member of the party. And I wanted to start with that just to point out that, I've always approached this issue with a great deal of care, understanding that, the question of making sure that everybody has equal access to economic opportunities is a really important value for me. And I find it frequently being used against people who are genuinely concerned about leaving a better environment and clean water for our children and grandchildren. Not because of some genuine concern, but as a cynical political ploy. And I want to give you the facts that I see for this proposal today. I want to answer some questions. But I start there because I think we're in a really terribly destructive debate. And one that is not being courted by folks who care about clean water. But some folks, I think, are willing to pull the pin on the grenade if they have to get their way. And I'm just really genuinely worried about that. I don't know how many of you were at the 2014 DFL convention. There was a platform amendment put forward that had never been submitted to any Senate district, as far as I know, or operating unit. It arrived de novo on the ballot at the DFL convention. Some people in this room joined me and many others in fighting that platform amendment. And it was a big lift. And it was one of those things that really illustrated to me that the party as a whole, when it came right down to it, the side that wanted to put into our platform that we approve of all forms of mining, frac sand mining, copper nickel sulfide mining, just without even thinking about what that means for water, they realized that they didn't have the votes amongst those DFL delegates to approve that resolution, which is why it got pulled. So that took a great deal of organizing effort from many folks who are in this room today. So we have a debate in this state. We have a debate inside of our own party about it. But I wanted to let you know that for all the noise and all the money that's spent, $1.6 million spent lobbying this issue by the mining industry over the last 3 years. Right now, there's $125,000 worth of television ads running in Duluth over the next week and a half for Mining Minnesota, which is the industry trade group. They called us liars yesterday. And you got to understand, $125,000 in Duluth, that's a lot of money in media in Duluth. That's a ton of money.
Need to add one small comment, just so you know, I'm the chair of the unit in which PolyNet is going to be done, if it passes. Even 3 years ago, GFL unit was 50-50 on this.
So as we go into this little conversation, just keep in mind that I'm not unaware, and I don't think any of us should be under the illusion that this is not a hot issue. However, I think it is also fair to say that when folks understand the issues that are at stake, they come down on the side of saying this mine is too dangerous to approve, it's not worth the risk, and would do more harm than good for Minnesota. So first of all, just a quick primer on sulfide mining. If you're not familiar with it, if you are, you allow your attention to wander freely and come back to me in just a moment. But we are all familiar with the fact that we have a long history of taconite and iron mining in Minnesota going back to the 1880s. By a geological happenstance, there's another body of metal right next to the iron ore body that we call the Mesabi Iron Range, called the Duluth Complex. This is a much older geological formation. It goes back billions of years to the mid-continent rift. And it's a volcanic geologic formation that contains very small amounts, at best about 0.5% of metals that are combined with sulfur. These are called sulfide ores, and that happens in the way that the industry refers to it. So we've got this long history of iron mining, and you might be aware if there's pits in the Cayuga Range, for example, that turn into a state park. There are iron ore pits that are used for fishing and swimming. And so oftentimes we have this very rosy picture of what a closed mine looks like in Minnesota because of that. And by the way, taconite mining has its own pollution problems that are also significant, but not nearly as significant as this kind of mining. The problem is that sulfide ore, once it's exposed to air and water, ground up finely like you do when you blow up lots of rock and grind it up so you can process it, will continually emit sulfuric acid, heavy metals, and sulfates for as long as it is exposed to air and water, as long as thousands of years. We know that from experience because there are mines that go back to the Roman era that are still polluting today in Europe. We know that from the fact that in the western United States, remember this, the pictures this summer of the Animas River and the Gold King mine blowout, bright orange water flowing downstream. That mine had closed almost 100 years ago. So it's not analogous to exactly to what Klemz is proposing, but it goes to show that that sulfide ore, once it's exposed to air and water, continues to pollute for virtually ever. And the only way you can stop it is to deny air and water to that ore. Now with that so we often think about pollution as being a smokestack or a pipe that dumps the effluent, leftovers, or byproducts of industry. In this case, the pollution is the result of that elemental chemical reaction between that sulfide mineral and air and water. And that's why it's so pernicious and so hard to stop. Because the whole point of mining is to take that stuff and grind it up finely. And if you know anything about from your high school chemistry class about surface area, you take a big boulder and blow it up into little tiny pieces. And now there's all sorts of places for that chemical reaction to take place. It's impossible to stop once it starts, and all you can do at best is capture that water and treat it with expensive, high energy, and difficult to manage processes. And that's what Polymet proposes to do. Right, so, take one more step back. Polymet wants to build an open pit mine. Near the town of Hoyt Lakes in Babbitt, 3 open pits, 700 feet deep, at its deepest, 696 feet. They want to reuse the old LTV steel plant, which closed in 2001, right after the winter of 2000. And that plant used to be a large taconite mine that exhausted its deposit and went out of business abruptly and stiffed a bunch of workers on their pensions, as well as really throwing the town of Hoyt Lakes into a tailspin. At its peak, the LTV steel plant employed 3,100 people. Polymet, at their best, proposes to employ approximately 300 to 360 people. And so no matter what happens, the town of Hoyt Lakes will never recover its population and its industry from the heyday of the iron mine that was there. Polymet would dig up 960 acres of wetlands. That's their projection. That's what they've applied to do. Almost 1,000 acres of high-value wetlands, and it would drain about 8,000 more acres of wetlands indirectly. When you dig a big hole in the ground, what happens? Water runs into it, and so where does that water come from? It comes from the surrounding wetlands, and by draining those wetlands of their water, you kill them. And there is no plan in in Polymet's EIS, Environmental Impact Statement, to replace the 8,000 acres of direct wetlands that will be destroyed. They do have plans to do wetlands restoration projects for the 1,500 acres or so that they need to under their direct destruction. This would contaminate water in the St. Louis River watershed. The headwaters of the Embarrass and Partridge River are on the site. Those flow into the St. Louis River, which is the largest tributary of Lake Superior. And also there is a possibility of contaminated groundwater from the mine after closure flowing northward into the Boundary Waters watershed. To give you one last piece of little geology, this is what they call the Laurentian Divide. It's one of the highest points in northern Minnesota, and it divides water flowing south and flowing north. Polymet's mine is 3/4 of a mile south of the divide. It's perched basically on top of the headwaters of two of the most important watersheds in North America. And it puts both of those watersheds at risk. I won't go into all the, Jesus, if you saw this stuff yesterday, this is how tall the document is. I'm going to give you just the quickest version of how to understand why this gigantic document, which purports to show that Polymet is safe for the environment, is incorrect. The reason why is what I started talking about earlier. The pollution that happens because of the reaction between air, water, and the ore. That will happen forever unless you keep air and water from it. So all of Polymet's plans involve doing one of two things: either trying to keep air and water from getting on that waste rock and ore, and two, catching all the water, 99.5% of the water is what they say, and treating it with expensive reverse osmosis technology till it's clean enough to be emitted. Why I start with that is to say this pollution will happen, and the dispute is about whether or not you can keep it from escaping the 11,000 acre site and getting out into the general environment. There is no debate or dispute about whether or not this pollution will occur. How much, there can be a little bit of discussion about it, but it will happen. And the question is there a way to stop it at the border, treat it before it gets out? And that's Polymet's contention, that they can do that reliably for as long as it takes, quote unquote, which is going to be, according to their own documents, at least 200 to 500 years on the site. And that's why groups and people who are concerned about the environment have been fighting this proposal now for a very long time. Because even if you buy everything that was in that document, you have to believe that somebody will be there to run the pumps and run the water treatment plant for as long as it takes. 500 years, which, by the way, I looked this up, Sean, it was 1522, so I was right. Martin Luther was alive 500 years ago, but he was a Catholic. So, that's how long we're talking about. That's the extent of the time period we're talking about. There's a whole bunch of other issues that I'm happy to talk about, but I just wanted to give you the most basic idea about what's at stake and what the problem is and why you should not simply take the planned pronouncements that the water will be protected, which you've been hearing for the last couple of days from the Department of Natural Resources, at face value. You have to understand one more thing. That gigantic document is primarily based on a hidden computer model. It's not hidden, everyone knows it's there. But all those predictions are based on computer simulations about where water will flow and what kind of contamination will be there. It's a very complex thing and very hard for general members of the public to understand. But here's the most basic reason why they're screwed up. One is they didn't assume that there was a gigantic hole in the ground 3/4 of a mile north of their planned site. So what happens when you put a gigantic hole in the ground, 600 feet deep? Well, as I said before, water flows into it. They didn't even put that into their computer at all. So they don't even know what's there in terms of which direction it will flow. All of that work was done by a company that is a contractor to Polymet and was confirmed by the DNR, but it's never been independently run by any third party, by any independent scientists, but rather is being taken at face value by the folks who put it forward, Bar Engineering. And I'll add one last thing, which is unpolite to say apparently, but I'll just make sure I add it. The last 3 division heads of the Lands and Minerals Division of the DNR now work for industry. Everybody who's left the Lands and Minerals Division head since 1988 has gone to work for the sulfide mining industry or its contractors. 2 of the last MPCA commissioners, of the last 5, now work for the sulfide mining industry either as a lobbyist or as the vice president of Polymet. When Brad Moore, who's the current vice president of Polymet, left his post at the MPCA and went to go work for Barr Engineering in 2009, he told the press that you won't see me in front of the MPCA board anytime soon. Most of the work that I'm going to be doing is going to be doing out of state. Within 2 years, he was working for Polymet. And now, he's bringing this proposal back. And he is the person who is oftentimes trotted out as the example of why you can trust this company. Because he used to work for the DNR and the MPCA. How could you not trust that? We have a problem. Our problem is a revolving door of regulators. We have created a situation where if you are friendly to industry, you have a golden parachute. When you leave, you will find a nice job working for the contractors or for the industry itself in Minnesota. A couple years ago when there was a mining and leasing hearing, I believe this is actually the one where Rebecca Otto voted against the leases, the president of Idea Drilling, who was one of these contractors, proclaimed to the committee that you could trust their work and their environmental consciousness because Barney Vadas, one of the former heads of Lands and Minerals that I mentioned, worked for the company. And I put this all on the table to say that we should be very cautious about assuming that regulators in this state are truly even-handed umpires calling balls and strikes as they see them. We have outsourced much of the work that we do for environmental review to independent contractors. If Republicans had had their way in 2010 and 2011, we would have given that entirely to outside contractors, and the DNR would have only been able to the DNR and the MPCA would have only been able to have 30 days to review their work and object to it. Luckily, we didn't go quite that far, but still, a significant portion of the environmental review that we do in this state is dependent upon the contractors that do it. In the case of Barr Engineering, they have a direct financial stake in the outcome because they are also the engineer of record for Polymet. So, all of these things tell me that we should be very skeptical about pronouncements that this environmental impact statement that's out there is accurate, even-handed, and accurately reflects the risk. We know exactly what the risks are from this kind of mining. We know it because we've seen it happen over and over again. 40% of the watersheds in the western United States are contaminated from sulfide mining at or near their headwaters. The EPA lists this as the most toxic industry in the United States. And we have no shortage of examples of mines similar to what the type Polymet is proposing, failing in spectacular fashion and leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. And the one that is the most present is the Mount Poly mine in British Columbia, which was built in the mid-90s. It has, in 2014, it busted its tailings basin, spilling billions of gallons of toxic waste into the most pristine and one of the deepest alpine lakes in British Columbia, which is also near part of the headwaters of the Fraser River, one of the most important salmon rivers in British Columbia. So, we're having this discussion in Minnesota as if we're in a reality bubble, as if there's not a track record of pollution from this industry, as if there's not a history that we can look to see what's likely to occur. And this is the reason why so many folks have gotten up in arms about this. One last personal note before I open the floor to questions. In 2009, I was a graduate student. I was going to the University of Minnesota Duluth for the Advocacy and Political Leadership program there. And I needed to do an internship, and I saw a thing on Facebook about a movie called Precious Waters, which is how I first met Bob and Pat, by the way, which was being shown in the back room of the REI in Roseville. So I went to the REI in Roseville, and there were about 30 people there. Greg Seitz, who was at the time the communications director for Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness, was presenting this film, which they had done, and interviewed Bob and Pat as part of the film itself. And in the front row, there were 4 or 5 who I learned later were mining lobbyists. Frank Ungaro, who called us a liar, was there, as well as Ernie Lehman, who's now passed. He was probably the dean of mining lobbyists in Minnesota. He was one of the original explorers of the area for minerals and geology. Several other folks, too. And they'd been drinking. There's no doubt there was whiskey on the breath. And at the end of the, in the middle of the film, they kept on getting up to interrupt and argue that it was a lie. And afterward, they were so obnoxious that I stood up at one point and I said, this is not the resource of the state or even the local people. This is a national and international resource. We're talking about waters that are so important that isn't there more to it than just, what local elites want? And I got shouted down. Afterward, I went up to Greg's sites and I said, I really want to do an internship with you guys. And that's why I'm here now. So it all backfired. I probably wouldn't be standing here today if it weren't for the fact that people went out of their way to try to educate Minnesotans about this issue 6-7 years ago. And I saw the tactics that are used in response, which is to shout people down, interrupt them, make them feel like their opinions aren't valid. Look, I'm like you, probably. I carry one of these around in my pocket. By the way, the back says you can't make it. But I know that my consumption has impact on the planet. I do my best to reduce it in ways that I know how. I find it incredibly cynical that the industry's best argument is to try to make people feel bad. Like, where's the copper in your phone come from, huh? What about that computer you got? How about your car? You want to live in a cave? Right? That's the argument you get on the other side. And here's what I have to say in response. We have over 1 million tons of copper that just got idle because there's no one to buy it. We have another 1 million tons coming online in 2016 from new mines that were invested in the Dodo period when it was $4 a pound. We have another 1 million tons coming on the year after that. We have no shortage of these metals. We have a long history across the globe of making a mess of wherever we get them. And I would also add to you individually that, yeah, you should think about your consumption about these metals and how you can reduce it. But at the same time, it's not as simple as you have a choice between living in a cave or supporting power. You have a lot of middle ground and a lot of thoughtful ground, right, between how do we get the metals that we need to live in a modern society in a way that does not destroy the environment that surrounds it. That's a little bit of a sermon. I'm sorry, y'all. A couple quick things. Go ahead. Questions?
Do you think that Governor Dayton has committed himself to support this proposal?
I do not think he has committed himself to support this proposal, though I think he is moving in that direction. I think that's why it's critical that folks let him know what they think. That's why I think that this comment period, so there's a 30-day comment or public objection period that's currently in place for the filing of that proposal. Officially, it started yesterday. And so far, I think at least 3,000 public comments or objections have been filed. They let us open a little bit early. But the other thing that we've been asking the governor to do, for folks who are opposed to these projects, is to call the governor and leave a message. Now, as you may know, the governor's father died 2 days ago. And so, in respect for his family, we've folks who I know and who have been involved in advertising have dialed back a little bit in terms of the contact the governor message. I think it's absolutely critical that it continue, though, because I think that he needs to understand the level and depth of which people are concerned about this. The truth is this, the proponents of this project are extremely loud and pretty well organized, and they really got a bug in the ear of certain people. I don't want to use Rebecca as an example again, but I will because I think it's really instructive. The moment she voted against mineral leases, which for eventual mineral development, as soon as the meeting was over, I watched as 8 lobbyists went like this immediately. I mean, it wasn't even a moment's breath between the end of the meeting and when Harry Melander from the trades was in her face. It's really incumbent on people that care deeply about it to say that, because you have to understand, they pay millions for lobbyists to make sure that they're getting that message to the governor's office consistently. Citizens have to fight that back.
Yeah, Aaron, you said that the start of your talk that the paper called you a liar. Other than obviously being passionate about this issue, what was their basis for calling you a liar?
They did not specify. which makes me skeptical.
It's just, they just called you a liar?
Liars, yes, they're liars.
Well, you know,
I got to be a liar too.
Yeah, no, Kristen's one of the liars as well.
and that's not common knowledge. But anyway, a couple of things to reinforce what you said was, number one is the EIS. Now, I haven't obviously read the EIS or heard about it, but EISs traditionally in the country are funded, if not funded, the consultants are picked by the industry. So first off, it's stacked against the individuals. Same thing is going to happen with Sandpiper EIS, with the new line 3 is not a replacement, it's a new one, and the reason they're trying to call it a replacement is because of the presidential permit. This is one thing that a lot of people in here need to know about. I know there's some people in here that are aware of these issues, but the EISs, unless they're independently directed and picked, are going to come stacked against you.
I want to be really careful about this because I know there are people in this room who have been involved in the environmental review process on the regulatory side, and I want to be sure that I'm scrupulously accurate about this. I'm not saying that I think that they're necessarily like rigged games or rigged documents. Here's what I do know.
I'd say it.
Well, I wouldn't go that far because I know what, there's so many assumptions that are built into these kinds of review, especially one as incredibly complex as this, that there are, if you make a few changes in assumptions, you can change the result in pretty profound ways. Of all the parameters that we're aware of in this water model that we have problems with, there's a facially neutral explanation for why they've chosen the data points they used or made the assumptions. However, there are better data points that they could have chosen if they'd gone and done it. And so it's really not a matter of somebody sitting there literally thinking, how do I create a document as a way of trying to circumvent the law? I think it's more of the fact that you've got so many assumptions and so many data points that are done by private contractors. By the time the DNR gets it back, or the regulators get it back, it's very, very difficult to tease it out and figure out what all those are. And it takes a tremendous amount of effort, whereas if we had truly independent science from the beginning, we would be checking work we'd be doing. I think that's one of the biggest differences.
Yeah, you know, and you're right in that, but a lot of the data comes from the companies.
Yeah, that's
It's
true.
the same thing more on the pipeline.
And you know, there was a story in the paper that said that PolyMed has paid probably like $45 million, I think, for the environmental review so far. Most of that goes to private contractors. Those, by the way, are chosen by the DNR, to be fair to them, of course, with advice from the company about who's capable of doing that work. And in Minnesota, there are probably only 3 or 4 companies that are capable of doing that work, and they are also deeply embedded in the actual operations side. All right, I'm talking. Way too. All right, yeah.
With climate change and storms becoming more intense than before, is that addressed?
They do leave a substantial amount of what they call freeboard in the tailings basin. That is also part of the problem, though, because we've seen before that lots of mines predict that they'll have less water in place than they do. One of our biggest concerns about the water model is that it understates the amount of water that will be there. So yes, they claim that they have designed a tailings basin that would meet a 500-year flood event. As you know, we've had 3 500-year flood events in the last 15 years in Minnesota. Just ask the folks in Duluth, right? So, well, I'm not saying that they've completely not answered that question. I think the concerns about changing climate, especially with catastrophically large amounts of rainfall happening in a short period of time, those things are definitely.
So have we told folks how to comment?
Yes. Wow. So first of all, the comments to the DNR are now open. You can do so by email or by mail. mndnr.gov/polymed is their page. On that page is the entire environmental impact statement. You can look at it at your leisure if you like. It's very edifying reading. It's hard, but as we said yesterday when in the press event that we did, it's incredibly difficult for members of the public who do not have a technical background to go through this document at all, let alone in 30 days, and to make meaningful comments about it. We've done a lot of the work to try to simplify things in environmental groups. There are lots of different environmental groups that have worked on this issue collectively. We've arrived at a common comment you can do that to go to any number of nonprofit or advocacy groups on the environment, they are going to have the same thing. So folks from Water Legacy, Mining Truth, Minnesota Environmental Partnership, right? All of these are basically the same thing. And that's part of a strategy to make sure that the regulators get the same message consistently, regardless of which group is gathering which comment. Those will go to all the agencies. The other thing is the dirty little secret of this environmental review period is that before they had one email box, now they've got 3. So if you want to go on your own and do your own comment, which I also encourage, keep in mind that if you send it to the DNR, the 2 federal agencies that are doing this review will not receive it. And they will not consider it in their records of decision for the proposal. But here's the thing. I don't think it really matters what the technical argument is. Trust me, there are smart people out there who've hired lots of scientists to try to make those technical comments. They're there, right? What is honestly important, to go back to the beginning of this little sermon, is the energy and the action. So I encourage you to not just go to a website and do a little collectivism, which is nice, and it's something that I kind of specialize in, so I'm not trying to put myself out of a job here. So go do fill out one of those comments. But then pick up the phone and call the governor. 800-657-3717. That's 1-800-657-3717. Operators are standing by 24 hours a day, and they'll leave a message. And I hate to say it's this simple, but the way this works for staffers like the governor's office is they'll come through every day and they'll say, well, what are people calling about? And they'll say, well, people have been calling about Polymet. Well, what are they saying? They don't like it. How many folks call? 300, right? That's kind of how that information filters up to those decision makers, but it starts with people picking up the phone and calling. And I know that a lot of folks are like, I don't want to call, can I send an email? You can if you want. That's effective too, but I really think that if you want to make a difference on this and you feel passionate about it, pick up the phone and call the governor and tell him why you care about this stuff. You don't have to be an expert. I think one of the things that's the most disturbing about this to me is that this idea that if you're not someone who has a PhD in hydrology, you're not supposed to care enough about this proposal, or you're not capable.
Or if you're not from the Iron Range, you have no right to comment because it's our jobs. Well, we don't buy that, right? It's our state, it's our water, we're all sharing it. Folks, I think there may have been a quick question, in fact, and I also want to be cognizant of time.
Yeah, I'm only wondering, and you probably said it and I just didn't hear, when the governor is supposed to make his decision.
That's a good question. So here's the process as it is right now. We're in a 30-day comment or objection period for the environmental impact statement. If that is deemed adequate by the DNR commissioner, then they can start trying to issue permits. My guess is this gets to the governor probably sometime in mid-2016. If the governor doesn't act before the legislative session, he will wait till after the legislative session to act because it's a nest of vipers over there. And so the upshot is I really think that you're likely to see the governor's taking a very deliberative approach to this, which we appreciate. I think the governor deserves credit for trying as best he can to stay neutral on an incredibly hot issue. There's a lot of things the governor's done that I think are good due diligence, like visiting a couple of mines, indicating that he thinks the finances of the company to be examined before he makes a decision about that permit. But my guess is sometime in 2016. So we're at a really important stage right now.